stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Oh, and you know what? I'd like to have a moment of silence for the young mom and her daughter who lost their life in the Hampton fire a couple days ago. Thank you.
With that being said, just so everybody knows, there is a GoFundMe for that family. If you have access to Facebook online, they are doing that. They're trying to raise money just to support, you know, the husband or the father and the son in the situation.
Okay. Oh, we have two for
Yes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Got the first part up. All right, so new business. We have an approval of agreement with the Ohio EPA. You want to discuss it briefly and
yeah, so
everybody knows?
So Mike, do you want to stand up for a second? So this is Mike Deerfield. Mike's from Parkman. He's the one that originally, if everyone remembers, came up to, or actually Mr. Larkin went down to their trustee meeting with Henry. Henry's one of the trustees. You're one of the trustees as well, correct?
Yes.
First name?
Peters.
Okay, and we went down and talked to them. They brought the water containment or contamination issue down there.
Yeah.
We kept pushing on on EPA along with ODH and ODOT, and then Mike reached out to I think everybody, you know, short of Biden himself probably, and we went through and did all those things, and we got some information from OEPA that they're going to provide us a contract, which you all got a copy of, straight from the prosecutor's office, which was like today. That's why I got so late. That contract is allowing us $300,000, $150,000 which is up front, so we're not fronting the cost, and that will allow us to start in essence going out and drilling wells immediately. And it's going to be on the OEPA and governor office's dime is really what it's coming down to. And let me pull up. They did. So the statement that we'll give out for those that want it, I had to make sure OEP and everybody approved of it, but in the early months of 2022, Parkman resident Mike Deerfield brought to my attention the issue with the water quality around ODOT Salt Dome in Parkman. The water quality issue dates back over, I think it's over 10 years, correct?
Well, yeah, it's been getting worse and worse.
Yeah, over 10 years, and has been affecting the day-to-day life of some residents in Parkman. Environmental Health Director Daniel Lark and myself attended a Parkman trustee meeting quite some time ago, and we were able to firsthand see the struggle that some in Parkman are facing. Parkman trustee Henry, I'm going to butcher your name, Henry? Dushare. Attended the, I always say Henry, attended the Geauga Public Health Board of Health meeting and provided first-hand experience with the issue that Parkman residents were experiencing. Mr. Lark and I began to reach out to all resources available to provide assistance to those in the Parkman community affected by the water quality issue. And through combined efforts with Mike Deerfield, Henry, Dan Lark, and myself, we were able to find assistance from Ohio EPA and the Ohio Governor's Office. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine tweeted on October 26, 2021 that clean water and reliable infrastructure are essential to the health and future of our state. Governor DeWine and the Ohio EPA has shown that this is not simply a hollow statement and that they're invested in ensuring clean water for Ohioans. The grant provided by the Ohio Governor's Office and Ohio EPA will be a life-changing event for many who live in Parkman and who have access to current clean drinking water. Governor Mike DeWine and the Ohio EPA provided a $300,000 grant to Geauga Public Health to drill new wells for those affected by the issue in Parkman. The grant funding will not only be used to provide will only be used to provide new wells to those affected in Parkman. On behalf of Geauga Public Health, I'd like to personally thank Governor Mike DeWine and the Ohio EPA for their assistance in providing the clean drinking water to our residents. Geauga County Prosecutor Jim Flays and Geauga County Auditor Chuck Walder have assisted in this process to ensure that we are able to cut through the red tape and help provide relief to those in Parkman immediately. Those two individuals responded immediately, Mr. Walder and Mr. Flays, and provided necessary insight and assistance to reduce nearly all the things that could have drawn out the timeline to help those in Parkman. They both jumped on a call, I believe it was Tuesday, with myself and the EPA and all their legal team, and ensured that this money's going to go directly to us, directly out to the residents, and we're not going to have any red tape sitting around. So it was a great just collaboration between Mr. Walder, who's here, and Mr. Flays, who is unable to be here. Because my fear was, as usual things, red tape happens, and a week turns into a month turns into a year. Lastly, thank you to Mark Johnson at the Ohio EPA for coordinating much of this process and getting documents turned around as quickly as possible. Thank you to each and every one of you who have assisted with this as possible. Geauga County is better off thanks to each and every one of you. So that's the message that'll go out. The contract, all I have to do is sign it, but we want to bring it in front of everybody here. The other reason is we have to do appropriations increases and certification increases to spend this money, because $300,000, I don't have that in any one of our funds just sitting there ready to be used. There is, talking with Mr. Flays, we don't need to waive the bidding procedure, which is what originally we had thought we had to waive, and that's because each one of these should be below $50,000. My concern with piggybacking is kind of look like if one person won all of them, which is probably likely to happen, but they're going to be done separately, so he doesn't think that's going to be a problem.
So there's not going to be any bidding?
There'll be quotes more or less, so we'll go out and get quotes for everybody.
But there'll be multiple quotes?
Yeah, the bidding procedure itself, in my history of doing that, usually can take 2 to 3 months by the time you get a architect to draw up plans.
Yeah, like you're not going to do a formal RFP, you're just going to do
We will not. We'll get quotes for it based on the criteria we have, based on the EPA and the lot numbers. They're going to provide the exact lot numbers that they're paying for. Mr. Lark and I and the sanitarian team will then draw an arc out from that point. So if we know the contaminated houses are from point 1 to point 2, we'll start drawing an arc out from point 2 until we find no contamination. The goal would then be anything between point 2 and where the arc stops is wells that should be paid for through the OEPA grant. We can apply for additional funding if we find that necessary. It's not a guarantee we'll get it. We can apply for additional funding. The reason we're having a special board meeting, emergency board meeting, also is because we only have until December 31st with how this contract is written. Now, my understanding is we can always go back to them if we need more time, based on it's a very short timeline, but I'm sure they're trying to get it in before the calendar year end to get that done. It also puts a little bit of heat underneath our feet to not just sit around and hold on to this for 6 months. Not that we would, but if that happened. So the two big things for everyone to approve is we won't actually do the bidding requirements, which was letter B on here. We'll pass that because they're saying we don't have to do that. But we will do A, C, and D so that we can process this sooner than later. On the agenda, sorry. It's sorry, just the agenda.
I thought
Not
you
the
meant
contract.
but there aren't AC.
There's no A, C, and D.
Okay. Very good.
And we'll do roll call votes for each one of those.
So did you, I don't mean to ask this stupid question, but you read the agreement, Adam?
I did.
Because it is pretty onerous. Geauga Public Health.
Correct.
So I just want to make sure that.
This 100% sits on us. If we don't get it
Yeah.
done, it's on us. The only concern I have, which Mr. Lark and I did voice, and we're also talking to the Ohio ODA, Ohio Department of Health, is that they're saying that due to how their geologists looked at it, they don't need to double case the wells. In my experience, you would double case those wells. We'll also talk with the drillers. A roto drill is what they recommended to do this as efficiently as possible. There's actually someone from Southwind here, and he's one of the drillers. He wanted to come out if you heard about it. But we'll get some quotes from different drillers, some quotes. The only thing I don't know about is that double casing. Because we look back at, there's actually a well site online you can look at and see what wells have and everything, and there's a lot of soft clay soil or creamy soil they call it, that goes down quite a bit, or sandy soil. So Mr. Lark is looking into that, but on the call, OEPA said their geologist said it is fine, it shouldn't be a problem. It's still something we want to make sure we're not, putting ourselves in a worse spot 5 years from now or 2 months from now.
And where are we, I saw there was a list of homes that right now we're looking at for the wells, and where approximately does that fall with the $300,000, or are we thinking that's going to be below
Their
that
expectation
number?
will cover all of those.
Okay.
Obviously, what's going to come down to is that is not double casing.
Okay.
And the second aquifer, I believe their estimation was about 300 feet down. So they do have additional funding, which we may have to apply for based on how many other homes come out that's testing positive. We also have a couple other unique situations with wells in that area that we talk about as well. So I'll talk about Mark Johnson with the Ohio EPA Assistant Director. It might not be the exact definition of this contract, but it is affected by that, and so we look at trying to wrap that in this as well. But again, from my standpoint, this contract is not totally different than how I would do it in terms of you don't want to have an unlimited liability. So you put out X criteria, Y cost, and say you have to do this within these 2 criteria. But a lot of this is gonna come down to us moving extremely quickly.
Yeah. And you think that timeline is doable?
Yeah,
By the end
given,
of the year?
can you drill when the weather changes?
As of right now, that's the only timeline we were given. We can apply for modifications if we need, is my understanding. That's if we're getting them, we can apply.
Yeah.
But as of right now, they want this done fast. I think that's why there's a fast timeline.
And it doesn't seem like, I guess you could extend it, but
Yeah.
is that?
I mean, it says you can't extend it there, so, I mean, they'll
so
take
that
work
would
with us,
be something.
but, I mean, they're
You're
giving
showing
us
progress.
$300,000,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
think
Right.
it is, but, and then I was gonna ask another question. Oh, so, and your understanding is we would get that 50% upfront because the agreement and then the exhibit A were actually said two different things. The
Yeah, so-
exhibit A said we may receive the down payment when we execute it, and then the agreement said we would, so I
Yeah,
just wanted
so
to make sure.
I'm going off the agreement, which is the agency shall pay the grantee, which is us, subject to cash availability, 50% of its total grant award upon completion of this agreement, or sorry, execution of this agreement, which would be tonight,
Yeah.
theoretically tomorrow. To use the project costs, grantee may submit a request for an additional 25% of this grant award, which shall include documentation that the previous payment was liquidated.
Right, yeah, I saw that, but that, if you look at the plan and scope of work, that actually
Mhm.
contradicts that.
Yeah, from my understanding from them, when we were on the phone call with Mr. Flays and Mr. Walderon, the money's coming up front.
Okay.
So they stated that to all of
And then
us.
for the remainder, can you tell me how that's gonna work? Like, who's going to be paying, how's the money gonna move? Do we have to front any costs before we get the second half, or the homeowner's gonna have to front costs?
Yeah, the homeowner wouldn't front anything. If anything, the health department would front a slight amount if necessary. Hopefully it doesn't come down to that, but my goal would be more than likely we'll make a transfer at the next September board meeting and transfer a little bit of cash into that fund as a precaution.
Okay.
Because essentially, we just have to provide documentation that the previous ones were
Correct.
liquidated,
Yes.
right? Okay.
And we should go through this very quickly. So I'm making a bold assumption that if one person gets probably most of those wells, they're gonna just drill them in succession. They're not gonna like, oh, I'm gonna
Yeah.
take a month off and come back.
Right, they got the equipment out there.
Right, they're gonna make good use of their time.
And if the approval is just for the single walled well and a homeowner wants to do a double walled, is that gonna be an option? Like, are there ways for the homeowner?
The homeowner would have to pick up the difference, and that
So
would
that's
be.
an option though.
I'm willing to work with anybody.
Okay.
If they're willing to cut us a check for the difference, I'm not, I'm willing to work with them. But it would not be the health department paying that additional outset.
Okay, the other thing I had a question about as far as the eligible and ineligible expenses, it says that the tax is ineligible, and I was wondering, is that sales tax?
Usually that would be some sort of sales tax, so we get a waiver up front anyways if we do anything else
Okay.
really.
That's what I figured. And then the homeowner, will they have to pay like an income tax on the value of the well?
That I do not know. Chuck, do you know what that?
South?
Well, we can't speak for the personal income of any resident, but I think the argument would be used as this is a replacement of a utility that's failed. I think that would be the argument that I would use. And then whoever has their taxes done would argue that position.
And the person from Southwind, who is that? You don't charge, do you charge sales tax on a well drill?
No, I don't.
No, I know. So that's probably not it.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be an issue.
Okay.
As mentioned here, things that are not covered are also the indoor plumbing modifications.
Yeah.
We are working with Mark Johnson, OEPA, on some additional options due to Mike, as an example, just as a random example, he had where the contamination was so bad, he was going through water heaters every 2 years, maybe he said?
About 12 to 13 months.
Sorry, 12 to 13 months, as well as other pipe issues.
Yeah, all my
So-
pipes need replaced.
We're trying to help however with that we can. Obviously, we cannot use our public funds, but if there's another grant resource that we can find or funding resource, we are looking into that to take the burden off the homeowner. There's no guarantees, but Mike and I have spoken a lot.
And typically with excessive salt running through your lines, if they're steel or copper or whatever, they corrode pretty quickly. Go ahead there, sir.
Has pH been checked? Because acid can cause that trouble also. Not saying that there's not salt, but this, I just wanted to, if you have tested for acid, if it has a low pH, it can attack plumbing, but also coming back to the salt issue with the bentonite grout, a low pH will eat bentonite grout and eat up other materials, but the salt and the acid together is a bad combination. somebody just needs to make sure that's not gonna be an issue down the road.
Yeah.
Where versus bentonite versus cement ground. I'm
Would that affect
concerned-
the single versus double wall issue?
Yes, and I'm concerned because it's not just salt, the pH. I personally have had wells where the pH is real low. We bentonite grout and everything is perfect. And I have a texter from Airway, one of the biggest cement grouting companies in the world. And he had a similar project here in Ohio where the state paid to have a well abandoned and they used whole plug, which is 100% solids. And within 2 years, it was void again, it was gone.
Wow.
And they had to cement, so that's just something for all the powers to be to think about.
And one of the questions I asked when we were on the call, is my main concern is there's 2 aquifers in Parkman. The first aquifer is once contaminated, allegedly. The second aquifer is the clean one, supposedly. If that one becomes contaminated, was my question. If something goes wrong and it's contaminated, what happens? The only option at that time, and again, this was like, me just proposing them a question and then answering off the cuff, was to, in essence, you'd have to take a line from Middlefield or from Burton down to Parkman, which is not a short distance. It's not gonna take a week to complete. You're talking about probably a year plus worth of work, I'm gonna guess.
Who's paying for it?
Right, believe me, that was a question, which was not answered. And they couldn't answer me, this was, they can only answer so much.
That would not be good.
But, so that is my main concern, is I don't want to try to help and accidentally cause more damage than trying to help. So this will be where when we go to these quotes, if everyone says, here's what needs to be done, and it's slightly different than this, it's us going back to the OEPA and the governor's office saying, hey, appreciate everything you're doing for us, we're recommending this. Where does that put us in life? And then going back to them and having that conversation, probably with Jim Flays and Chuck and OEPA, as how do we make this work? The other question you asked when it comes to money, part of the reason that we have like that emergency fund, actually we haven't created the emergency fund yet, we're gonna create an emergency fund, is for things like this, because the OEPA would not be required to front us money. And insurance, as an example, like public entity school, they don't have to front you money. So if your building burns down tomorrow, technically, usually you have to upfront that cost, they reimburse. If you don't have $2 million, then you have to put like 100,000 at a time until you get to where you have to get to. So this is part of the reason we try to have at least some savings when it comes to the entity in place for things like this. And if we spend 150,000 super fast, we get to the next 25,000 super fast, or next 25%, and there's that lag time, we can stage that difference, so we can bridge that gap. And then we just should be reimbursed, and we advance the money back up the fund it came from originally. So we are looking at that. But other than that, that's where we're at right now. This is a super quick turnaround. I think we met on Tuesday, Chuck, Jim, and I, and the OEPA and their lawyers, and we had this like the next day. And then Jim reviewed it yesterday and today, and got it back to me pretty much today. And then now we're ready to go with this. So,
Does the board have any other questions? And then we can, why don't we start with Auditor Walder? Do you want to make any comments? I think you want to.
Yeah, I guess I just want to thank the board for doing this. And I want to thank the residents of Parkman who pushed this. I think this is one of those rare times where people aren't cursing the EPA, right? Because it's like the IRS coming to pay you a visit. But what I want to ensure people, there's other remedies that we can help from the auditor's perspective. So if you have a home that is, your internal plumbing is damaged by this, theoretically, that is a reduction of value of your property. And you can apply for a VOR hearing to have your property value realigned, and it equalizes. It doesn't cost anybody any money, it equalizes the tax base. So it shifts it from the people that are hurting to those people who are not hurting. And it does it over a wide area. So it's a very minimal effect on the balance of the population, but it provides instantaneous relief to the affected parties. So those are available for the Parkman people as well. The deadline for that is you have to file between January and March 31st of any year for your particular parcel. And I encourage you to do that. My office will help you with that process if you haven't done it. We are actually working with some folks at Berkshire Heights on similar issues with their sewer plant, and I know we're going to be looking at the sewer issue in Parkman as well. I mean, this is how to do everything wrong, in my opinion, is we did water wrong and we've done sewer probably not the best way there. And we need to fix these issues. So I want to really thank Adam. Adam got the right people on the phone at a very short notice. And I will tell you, the temperament on that call was all about getting this done right. There was no resistance at all by the EPA, which I, quite frankly, was prepared for. I've never seen no resistance. So my hat goes off to Adam for spearheading this. What we plan to do in the auditor's office is we would treat this like a revolving grant. So as you burn off that $150K, the initial amount, as you get receipts, we will look at the contract terms and we will report those, we will let Adam report those, and we will encourage them to speed up the replenishment of that money. I've assigned this to my chief deputy auditor, so it has the highest level of oversight. He will help and work with whatever you need to do to set up your fund and to properly account for this and to make sure we have the right records. The worst thing we want to happen here is to do this wrong or to do it without proper documentation. So we're going to cut the red tape, but we're not going to cut out any oversight or any proper action. So I want to assure you of that. If there is a problem, I will be perfectly willing to take the heat and take the phone call. So, and I'm going to give out Adam's phone number with mine, so that's it first. So I just want to thank everyone for pushing this. And are you not going to declare an emergency then? Is it not necessary?
Jim is saying, when he talked to Susan, that he does not think it's necessary, because I was about piggybacking where it looks like
Right.
they all kind of, he's saying no. I guess I was actually asking your opinion, because my thought was, if we declare it and it's not used, it's not a big deal.
Matter.
Right.
No, the declaring of emergency just completely forgives the requirement of
Right.
having to worry about bidding over $50,000.
And
If anyone were auditing this and they were to audit your
Right.
books and say, this is really a concatenated project, it's connected.
yeah,
I mean, I could see Jim's argument is these are separate wells. If you're drilling a community well, that would be a different argument. But these are independent wells. It doesn't hurt to declare emergency, but it probably isn't essential for this.
and I know I told, before you were here, I actually told Rich and Dr. Cameron, Carolyn, my concern is, like, if I was auditing this, I'd probably say it's piggybacking. Now, if you have a legal letter saying it's not, I would probably say it's fine as well. But actually, my question was going to be for Chuck. And my thought is, if we say it, we don't use it, nothing actually happens. If we, my thoughts when the auditors come in, it's a lot easier to say, hey, here's a motion, by the board of resolution saying it's an emergency.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle. So
Right.
You've got to declare it now, or
Right.
after the fact doesn't work.
Right. So if we do it, it's not going to hurt anything. The legal saying we don't have to, but if you guys are okay with it, we're already here anyways, right?
Yeah,
So.
as long as it's not, we're not using any additional or allotting any additional resources
Yeah.
that we know we're not going to use, then I don't see any harm in doing that to save ourselves later.
Yeah, it's a precautionary effect at this point. It's not going to hurt anything.
Okay.
You know what, Dr. Cameron, your name is on this, so I neglected to ask, do you have any questions about this contract?
And I'm going to sign for Dr. Cameron. I crossed his name
Oh,
off just because being that
okay.
he wasn't involved, it's not fair to put him on the spot to sign something that, yeah,
Okay, all right.
inappropriate is best.
So, I guess the trustees, would anyone like to say anything before we do this?
Yes, we do.
Go ahead.
I'd like to speak. I've been dealing with this for over 2 years. I started this back from day one with me and Henry, reaching out to every agency that could help us, turned down by most, just kept pecking, phone call, emails. I've probably got thousands of hours. I've got probably 2.5 foot of documents, all from reports straight from ODOT, straight from EPA. ODOT's pretty much looked us in the face. I actually finally sent them a letter about 6 weeks ago to their attorney, because the attorney is the only person who's allowed to speak to me. EPA in Ohio, the guy that did the test, he's no longer allowed to speak to us. He's been told, he tells me, I have a child, I have a family, I cannot talk to you. So they've all shut down, they won't speak to us. That's when I reached out, I sent a letter straight to the ODOT, asking straight out, I know the calls, I know where it's coming from. I've got all the reports of all the tests that ODOT did. Through the Act of Public Information, I got all the tests. I've read every bit of it, I've sent it out, I've spent a lot of money to get them checked. I sent them a letter, I said, what are you going to do for our wells? Their response is, we are doing nothing. We disagree with your findings, your testing, we disagree, we're doing nothing. To me, that was a smack in the face. That's where it started. I reached out to Our regular Ohio EPA Northern Division did nothing for us. I reached out to the Central Division and ended up getting the Assistant Director of the EPA, talked to him directly. He knew nothing about this. So I asked for him to take it away from the Northern region. It got taken away. It's stuck in his hands for 4 weeks. I wasn't hearing much back from Mark Johnson, the Assistant Director. I got a hold of the Governor's office. I wrote to Lieutenant Governor. I wrote every legal assistant. I made 20 phone calls. The next day, EPA called me. The call was heard. Lieutenant Governor told him what's going on in Parkland. Well, from then on, the Governor stepped in, and I used one of his, I looked it up and Googled his exact word, every Ohio resident deserves clean drinking water. I took a snapshot of that, and I emailed it to him. And I was like, this is what our Governor says, we need water. So I have all the water tests, all the tests, your pH and all that. The EPA, Northern Ohio EPA, the health department pulled the testing, gave it to EPA. They tested for, I think, like 5 of our wells. I think 4. Because a couple of residents couldn't get their wells tested because their tenants wouldn't show up. I own I own 4 properties and a lot in Parkland. I have a lot tied up in Parkland. I've spent a lot of money on my properties in Parkland. My one house right straight across from it, I had the water tested. The water is beautiful on the north side of the road. Everything on the south side of the road, on the side of the ODOT facility, that's where the problem is. So they're saying that they'll start off with, I think, 6 or 7 wells. I've spent over $2,000 in testing of wells. There's 2 wells in Parkland at 300 foot, or 200 foot. The church in Parkland and one of the other residents. I tested the well, the water is good, which he should know if he hits the Bria, the drillers know. I spoke to a couple of the drillers, and they give me kind of an idea of how much it's going to cost. So you're probably going to get like 10, 12 wells at $300,000. My question is, are they going to seal the old wells? Is that part of this deal that it gets sealed? Because that's going to be a cost from the drillers to seal that off with the magneto, or how do you seal them?
Listed in here in the contract is abandonment of existing wells if necessary, and that is considered a yes. And landscaping and reseeding costs to restore property to original condition is a yes covered. The only items that are not, the items that are covered are well drilling casing, installation of submersible pump and piping, pressure tank and gauge, necessary electrical work for fully functional well systems, design costs, health district plan review, permit fee, connection of service line from well to existing indoor plumbing, and abandonment and then landscaping as mentioned.
So that answers a lot of that question. My other question, I spoke to Mark Johnson this evening on my way here before I picked up Henry. Because he calls me directly, I emailed him and he'll call me directly. Because I make a lot of noise and I guess people want to talk to me about it. So I spoke to Mr. Johnson. I said, my question is, number one, we're going to do the wells. Adam's been great on helping all this. The wells are going to get done. That's perfect. We get good water. My question to Mr. Johnson was, will the water be tested after the driller's done? Can we test the water and say, does this water need treated? Is it full of iron, calcium, which I've heard if you get to the Bria, it's supposed to be good water.
It's very good.
But if it needs to be treated, who will put the system in to treat it? I said, is that something the EPA will say, okay, we'll put it in. If it don't need treated, that's fine. But if it needs treated, would they put the system in for me, then I will maintain, the property owner, will maintain.
This says no.
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson said, no,
Yeah.
not at this time, that won't happen, and the other damages it's incurred from all this problem, I went through a boiler, I put a brand new boiler in, I put 2 new hot water tanks in. My house, literally, all the plumbing has to be ripped out. It's all copper. I've had my lead tested. My lead's high because of the solder joints. The sodium and chloride eats up the lead, which I got lead in my water. We cannot drink our water. We can't use our water for anything but taking a bath or a shower. You can't give it to your animal, you can't put it on a plant. You squirt it on a plant, the plant dies. This is the best thing ever that we're getting water for our community. Our only other concern was if it gets in the second aquifer, which most drillers and ODNH or Department of Health told us, or Natural Resources said, it should not happen. But I would rather have the double casing for protection, because that's protecting our city. Is that correct? If it gets down into the, there's still that chance that it can hit that second. If it gets in the Bria aquifer, Parkland's gone. Parkland's no longer there. I mean, we have no water. Without water, you have nothing. So, like when you said about the taxes, I would dare not ever want to lower my taxes because that lowers my property. As a property owner and an investor in Parkland, I don't want to go to him and say, hey, I don't want my house worth 250. Well, you knock it down to 175. What happens if I want to sell it? And then people look at it and say, something's wrong in Parkland. His house is not worth the money. I wouldn't ever want to do that personally myself. I want to keep my value up high on my property. I just want my water fixed. But my only other question was make sure that we get the double for our wells to make sure it's safe. I'd like the water tested after it's done, even if they don't treat it, but at least test it, we know that we're getting good water. We just need to protect ourselves. My other question was Mark Johnson. He said he's coming to my house within the next couple of weeks. He's coming directly to me, going to meet me, said he wants to shake my hand. I told him where his work boots. I want to walk around ODOT. I've been around that ODOT facility 100 times. I got pictures, videos. I got drone footage. I flew everything around that property to see what's destroying our town. He's going to come there, he's going to walk through, me and him's walking around the property. That's my question to him. I said, this is not over now. I said, if we accept this, we're not saying that we're done, right? You have your legal look at it, that we're not just saying, we'll take your well and buy Parkland.
So, yeah, so there was a concern, my kind of concern is if Parkman accepts this, they waive any liability. And my understanding is no, because the health department is accepting the contract, it's not Parkman. We are providing a service.
There's no waiver.
Right, we're providing a service, and so Parkman's not impacted, you know, because the question is, does Parkman have to accept it? The question, or the answer is no. We're taking a contracted grant, and if no one in Parkman wants to use it, it doesn't get used. If they want to use it, they can. It rolls out from there. As we, Mike, I talked on the phone, I talked with Mark too. I'm not aware of it waiving anything. Now, the other grant or some other contract would be a different story based on damages, because that's not in this contract.
He said, personally, when I asked him that question today, he said, we may look into another grant for damages. He said, I'm not going to tell you that will happen. And I asked him, I said, what about ODOT? As a community, we want them gone. It should have never been built there. 74 years of contamination going into that property. It's been there for 74 years. It's built on a hill, our whole community, it should have never been there.
That's probably the biggest fear that we have, is that it gets in that second aquifer. They're not gonna bring water from Middlefield. I mean, who's gonna pay for that? And the problem is ODOT never does anything. You know, 2 years ago, I have letters from them, and they're saying, oh, we'll put a ring around it, and we're gonna do this, we're gonna fix the retention pond, and we're doing, they haven't done anything. We're not gonna load our trucks. But there's a curb right outside that goes, and all last year, just spilling on the road. And then the trucks that come back, if they have any salt left, going down his street, High Street, they dump it on High Street. So, I mean, ice will never form on that road ever. You know?
It's a nuisance trespassing, what it is. They're spreading right on when they don't need to use it. I understand for the safety of the community, you have to have salt on the road. It's an evil thing that you have to have. We understand it, but the use of it and the neglect that they did, keeping up with their property. I asked them if they had any spill prevention. Do they have any plans on their facility? They have nothing.
No disaster plan whatsoever.
No, nothing. I've requested all the information. It came back, we have none.
And I believe Henry said when you asked, or when they said they were going to put that barrier in place, that was never put in place, correct? What you told me? Yeah.
They haven't done anything. I mean, it's just, it drives me crazy, because, you know,
And this is why I wanted to.
it's because it's irreparable damage if it happens.
Yeah.
And what are they gonna go, oh, geez, sorry, you know?
And there's some frustration. I mean, part of the reason I invite the Parkman trustees out, and Mike obviously, not just because it impacts them, but this was actually brought to our knowledge years ago, it sounds like, and nothing was done. So
Correct.
we're trying to help the best we can and make it right now the best we can. But they've been living through this nightmare for years.
Well, I got a letter here from October 22nd.
It started in 19. We started in 19.
2000.
It's right before
19.
COVID, I think you said.
Yeah, 2019 we started.
Yeah, October 22nd, 2000, and all the stuff they were gonna do, and they didn't do one thing.
So I wanted to at least hear from them what happened. Mr. Larkin and I have been on 2 of their trustee meetings. We'll probably go down to another one to talk about the agreement, and then Mr. Larkin and I have to figure out how we're gonna arc out the testing to that criteria, which we told OEPA we'd have to, they knew we'd know right on the spot. We're gonna figure out what our testing criteria is, and we'll arc out until we find a negative zone, you know, where it's clean water, and then we'll push in from there to figure out what wells. On the call, OEPA said if you see X houses, they can't guarantee everything, but we can go back and ask for additional dollars. It'd be a separate contract, or maybe an addendum or amendment. But, because right now, we don't know how many, we don't know if it's 6, 7, 8, 10, 15, 20. That's where the testing's gonna come in. So we're gonna start doing that. I hate to say it, this is gonna get prioritized above everything else, which means everything else I'm telling you guys is gonna get done, that keeps getting pushed back, is gonna get pushed back again. The fees we have to do, which would be next time, but, some of the stuff we were planning to do is get pushed back, is to get this done by 12/31.
No, this is a priority.
It's all hands on, it's all hands on deck with all of our
There's
sanitary.
nothing more important than people having clean water.
100%.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So
so
will the testing be
that,
covered?
the testing is gonna be on us, and, I'm looking at any fee that we can waive, we waive it to maximize the dollars that go towards the wells. It's minimal for us. I mean, it's not gonna make or break us, but I think it's the right thing to do in some of these cases. So we'll look at what that dollar impact
Well,
will be.
this says that they'll pay for the fees.
Correct.
The
If we,
permit fee, so we should charge. for
correct.
permit
We're
fee.
gonna look at how much we need though to do everything we have to do. And,
Okay.
I mean, it's usually call it in kind. It's somewhat of a collaboration to bring any additional reduced costs down. So-
Can I, just one last question on that? What's the parameters on the testing of the wells? I asked Mr. Johnson that, and he said to speak to you, like my duplex that I have, that I want that well tested, to see, because it's on the southern part, right below my house, so I
Yeah.
wanna see.
I think Mr. Lark and I, we're gonna figure out how we're gonna arc out, and we're just gonna keep arcing out until we find a negative, and then we'll focus back inward. But we'll be testing pretty much everything out there in an arcing pattern until we get a negative test result, or at least a passable test result, but that way passable test result.
Okay.
That hasn't been set out in stone. They were okay with us. It's not in this contract, but us setting up that criteria afterwards, simply because there's no way, it would have pushed this back another week or two. And without their funding up front, I can't get well drillers out there saying, hey, our best intention is to pay you within a month. You know, I want that money in our pocket. I think when Mr. Flays, Mr. Waller were on there, they made it sound like as soon as we signed this, like the check or the money will be wired almost immediately. So we should have funding like next week, and we can start drilling right after that. Or at least getting quotes, let's put that way, quotes. So that's why.
Start the process.
Yeah, so that's why it's a little bit flying by the seat of your pants, a little bit, but the goal is we're confident that between Mr. Walder, Mr. Flays, myself, we got all of our boxes checked off, and we can push out in a reasonable manner that's still protecting the public funds and the wells. So if we can do this, we'll move right into the quotes, and then we'll start right into drilling right after that, with all haste. So we're using sanitarians nonstop for this for the most part.
So, I guess I would like to say that, as the board president, and I think the rest of the board is probably with me on this, we want to thank our administrator, Adam Litke, and the environmental health director, Dan Lark, who, listened to the comments from the citizens of Parkman, and I really appreciate everything you guys have done. And like I said, I guess obviously it wasn't being handled properly previously, but we're here to, see that going forward, we do everything we can to help people in this county. So, with that being said,
And real quick, Mr. Lark and I, we're also looking at so obviously going down to Parkman, but the goal is also to be out to other communities in case something like this is happening and we just don't know.
Yeah.
I've done that in other places I've worked where you go like, hey, this month we'll hit Parkman, next month is Russell, the week after that is whatever. It won't be consistent, it's not gonna be every single week, so we'll get nothing done. But the hope is that we find, if there's other small issues like this, we address them instead of letting them sit and having someone with no water for multiple years in Parkman sitting there struggling. Like I mentioned Mr. Deerfield, squeaky wheel. I said we have to be the squeakiest wheel they've ever heard, to the point where they go, holy crap, we gotta fix Parkman. And we were the squeakiest wheel. The hope is also the governor will be coming down. I'm pushing for that still, that the governor coming down, Mark Johnson from EPA, as well as his boss, hopefully. Because I want them to see the salt dome. I want them to see Parkman. It's a lot harder to be like, when it's just, I've heard about it, but when you're there, it's a lot harder to go home and say, it's like, I remember that guy, I remember his kid, I remember his grandmother, I remember his brother. That's a lot harder just to wave off a week later, a month later.
and hopefully we can get a couple of news stations or something, from the newspapers to come down and give us,
Yeah, some
and-
positive political
Yeah.
statement.
I want it to be known that what the trustees did, what Mike did, I want them, and what Jim and Chuck did, I mean, this was an all hands on deck, and
Yes.
it could have been
Yeah.
easy for Chuck or Jim to say, hey, I'm busy, I can't do this, and then it would have been a week with legal, it would have been a week with Chuck, it would have been a week we found out we didn't do something right. This was your government, your local government doing almost everything right, so I expect.
One last thing on that, the media's been reaching out for forever on this, and I've always been the person to tell Henry, no, we're not speaking to the media, because one thing can mess up our whole town. One wrong word, you need an attorney to write you a speech.
Yeah,
One wrong word could have destroyed our whole town of getting water.
right.
So that's why we've never reached out to any media, which they've called him and he'll call me, and I'm like, no.
They're afraid to let me talk to them.
I just tell them, no, we're not speaking, because we did not want to destroy our chance of getting water.
And I'm working with OEPA and the governor's office on any statements we make, so even the one I read tonight, that was approved by
So
them.
we're coordinating.
Yeah, because their messaging has to be the same as ours, we can't, say different things.
We don't want to step on any toes, make anybody mad and not give us water. At the end of the day, we want water.
Got
Right.
that right, bud?
So, I think the board's in agreement, we'd like to declare this as an emergency.
I mean, I appreciate Jim's opinion, I just think it doesn't hurt.
So, do we have a motion to declare this, water problem in Parkman as an emergency?
So moved.
Okay, so do we have a second?
Second,
Okay, I guess roll call vote, Mrs. Breaky.
yes.
And Mrs. Jones.
Yes.
And Mr. Moreno, yes. Okay, so that one passes. The next thing is move to approve the Environmental Protection Remediation Fund Assistant Agreement with the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve, so moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second,
Okay, roll call vote, Mrs. Breaky.
yes.
Dr. Jones.
Yes.
And Mr. Moreno, yes. Okay, that one passes. Now we're gonna skip down to the revenue certification. Move to approve the revenue certification for Fund 5011, private water as presented.
I'm gonna pass it back to you guys, it's
Yeah.
just moving $300,000 in revenue and expenses so we can spend the money, otherwise I can't, help.
Can't spend it.
Can't spend it. Chuck will slap my hand.
All right, I move to increase the private water system other revenues, account as listed by $300,000.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call vote, Mrs. Breaky.
Yes.
Dr. Jones.
Yes.
And Mr. Moreno, yes. Okay, that one passes. Okay,
And this is increasing the expense line, which is still on that paper, but
And are you gonna need
No.
that certified?
yes.
So when you call to
Mhm.
get a budget commission meeting scheduled, you just tell them that you talk to me, we're gonna do it immediately.
Okay,
So they'll go
They'll
off the
just process
schedule.
it.
They'll just create a new one, they'll
Okay.
do a special.
awesome, thank you.
so, move to approve this supplemental appropriation for Fund 6011, private water as presented.
Yeah, I move to increase the private water system contract services, account number as presented by $300,000.
Okay, so do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call vote, Mrs. Breaky.
Yes.
Dr. Jones.
Yes.
And Mr. Moreno, yes. That passes, okay. All right, what else we got? Any other business we're gonna talk about?
You can't,
Okay, so the next meeting of the Board of Health will be September 26th at 5 o'clock in this building. And I will caution you that that is a Monday instead of a Wednesday.
yeah, because of a quorum issue.
So, okay.